All right, we've covered a lot of ground in this brief course. Now let's look at what it's all about, happiness, and how happiness is related to and ultimately inseparable from the question of ethics. We'll start with an anonymous quote. "Happiness is a butterfly which, when pursued, is always beyond your grasp, but which, if you will sit down quietly, may alight upon you." What this quote suggests is that if you try to get happiness, it's likely to elude you. Now, there's actually psychological research to support this. An experiment that gave participants the choice of keeping one of two posters instructed half the participants to reflect on their reasons before choosing a poster, while the other half were given no such instructions. Those who reflected chose different posters than those who did not, and when asked how happy they were with their poster 1 week later, reflectors were less satisfied. It seems the reflective System 2 mind focuses too much on easily verbalizable and plausible reasons, while obscuring unconscious System 1 preferences. Now, the moral of the story here is that focusing too consciously on happiness can actually interfere with its arising by addressing only the conscious mind instead of the whole mind. So what is one to do with this? The best thing, it seems, is to follow the quote's advice. If you will sit down quietly, it may alight upon you. In other words, set the right conditions, and happiness may arise. Now, in the context of what we've learned in this course, that means not constantly asking, am I happy, but rather focusing on cultivating emotion, reason, and practice to the best of your ability, making each moment count within the larger context of the ideals to which you aspire. Then happiness, like the butterfly, may come to you. Now, of course, when happiness comes to you in this way, it's not by some mysterious act of grace. It's actually an unconscious System 1 process, which, when not interfered with too much by conscious System 2 reflection, produces a sense of joy and meaning at appropriate times. But because the process behind it is unconscious, it seems to us to arise out of nowhere, as if by grace, a wonderful gift. And so long as we set the right conditions and are receptive to that gift, we may find ourselves graced by it more and more. This is the lesson of the metaphor of the tree, where flourishing happens when earth, sun, and seed come together. Where is happiness in this picture? I would suggest that happiness is not any one of these things, but rather it's the flourishing itself. It's what tends to happen when conditions are right, when emotion, reason, and practice are engaged in a mutually supportive way. Happiness tends to arise. But what is happiness anyway? We've seen both hedonic happiness, or feelings of positive enjoyment, and eudaimonic happiness, or the flourishing life, the worthwhile life, the good life, the meaningful life. Researchers generally agree that both of these are healthy and valuable. At the same time, the two kinds of happiness differ in several important ways. First, the one is pleasant, while the other is better characterized as rewarding. Hedonic happiness feels good, but eudaimonic happiness may not. To see this, imagine Nelson Mandela, the great activist who fought apartheid in South Africa when he was languishing in prison. It probably wasn't an enjoyable experience for him, but it was worth something. It made a difference. It was cast in a meaningful context. No doubt Mandela would not call the experience pleasant, but he might say it was rewarding in the end. That is what eudaimonic happiness is like. Second, the two kinds of happiness differ in their orientation to time. The hedonic is about present experience, while the eudaimonic is about integration of past, present, and future. You've probably heard a lot of talk about focusing on the present moment. This is especially popular in meditation circles, and one benefit of focusing on the breath during meditation is precisely that it gives the mind a present moment focus, and that's a moment of respite from the stress of constantly ruminating over the past and planning on the future. And since a large part of such thinking is needless spinning in place anyway, and it tends to be unpleasant, taking a break from that can be very helpful. So you can see that this makes sense in terms of promoting hedonic happiness. However, it has probably also occurred to you that we cannot be effective agents in the world without learning from the past and preparing for the future. And this makes sense in terms of eudaimonic happiness, which may not give that pleasant respite, but which may prove rewarding in the end. Finally, hedonic happiness has been found to correlate with taking behavior and eudaimonic happiness with giving behavior. The former is more about satisfying needs, and the latter about social engagement, belonging, and making a contribution. Now, I don't mean to put a pejorative spin on taking behavior. Pleasure is generally good, and needs are obviously important. But nevertheless, it's just interesting to note that there is this dichotomy between the two, this yin-yang balance. A healthy lifestyle involves both give and take, and that's how I see the two kinds of happiness, things to be pursued together in harmony. This brings us to an interesting question. How much should we focus on giving and how much on taking? What's the relationship between happiness and ethics? Now, happiness and ethics may seem like an unlikely pair from a modern perspective, but ancient philosophy saw them as inseparable. Socrates famously believed that no one who truly understood what was good for them would ever commit an evil act. In other words, if you fully understand the consequences of antisocial behavior, including the negative aspects like punishment, as well as the lost positive aspects like friendships and a sense of belonging, you will be motivated to be pro-social. In short, ethics supports the pursuit of happiness, and the pursuit of happiness supports ethics. Of course, we now know that intellectual system 2 reasoning of this sort is just not enough to guarantee ethical action. We also have the intuitive system 1, which may lead us in other directions despite what we may logically reason is best for us. Nevertheless, Socrates' insight still stands insofar as it helps us to see that our own happiness is bound up with that of others, and therefore with ethics. And we can then practice in order to retrain our habits and transform ourselves in accord with our ideals. The same basic insight can be found at the heart of virtually all religious and philosophical traditions. The Golden Rule, which can be found in the writings of ancient Egypt, China, India, and many other places, clearly links the good of others to our own. Unsurprisingly, then, almost all religious and philosophical traditions have developed practices for training and embodying this insight. And we've seen many of them in this course. Widening circles of concern, as in Buddhist loving-kindness cultivation or Stoic oikiosis, is a prime example. Such widening, which extends our circle of concern beyond ourselves to include others and perhaps even the environment as well, can be supported in different ways in order to appeal to the whole mind. First, it may be supported by the day language of reason, as in Socrates' intellectual argument. Such satisfies the conscious system 2 mind, but as we've seen, the unconscious system 1 mind may have other ideas. So in addition to logical arguments, it can be helpful to employ also the night language of myth, as in the Hindu notion that all belong to one cosmic consciousness, so that the good I seek for me is the same as the good I seek for you, since we are both ultimately one. Indeed, the greeting Namaste is said to embody this respect for the value that runs through one another. The divine in me honors the divine in you. Through such different means, using both day language and night language, we can effectively transform not just the conscious mind, but the whole mind. With such widening circles of concern, we can even begin to transcend pure self-interest. Socrates' argument, or at least the way I've phrased it so far, frames ethics as sort of a means to an end, with that end being one's own individual happiness. But the more we practice widening and broadening, seeing ourselves as seamlessly integrated with a larger whole, the more we identify with the good of others for its own sake. Because we realize that on a deeper level, we are them and they are us. This begins to reach the point where we are willing even to surrender our own individual self-interest, or even our lives for that matter, for our children or our community, for civil rights, for gender equality, the long-term integrity of the ecosystem, or whatever accords with our ideals. In short, for the greater good. Thus, identifying with something larger than us, we come to see happiness as being the happiness not just of the individual, but that of the whole. And from there, ethics follows naturally. For what benefits me is what benefits the whole, and therefore also what benefits everyone within that whole. What's good for me is what's good for you. In summary, there are two kinds of happiness, the hedonic and the eudaimonic. They differ in important ways, yet they are both valuable and can be pursued in a healthy balance. Moreover, happiness is ultimately inseparable from ethics, insofar as our fates are all bound up with each other, and the best way for one to be happy is for all to be happy. What we need to do to be happy is set the right conditions, making each moment count within the context of our ideals, and then let happiness appear without trying too hard to get happiness. And if we do that, then we may find ourselves graced, so to speak, by the butterfly in the anonymous quote. If you will sit down quietly, it may alight upon you. Set the right conditions, and happiness may arise on its own.